Hello, everyone. We're just going to take a few more minutes and let everyone get logged in. So just hang tight and we'll get started here shortly. Got a big crowd tonight. Alrighty, we'll go ahead and get started and let those trickle in while we do some introductions. So first of all, I want to thank everyone for showing up tonight and attending tonight's parent webinar on how to stand out in a test optional college admissions environment. Tonight's webinar is hosted by A-List Education. So for those of you who don't know, A-List, we provide educational services. We consider ourselves market leaders, and we specialize really in everything from test preparation. We help students around advising for college-bound students, and also tutor students across all sorts of levels of education status. So I first wanted to say a big thank you to everyone who attended tonight, who's here to listen to what we're going to provide you some information around. And that's not only a thank you from us here at A-List, it's also a thank you for your students. What this tells me and showing up tonight is that you have your students' best interest in mind. You have college admissions on your radar at the right time, and you're doing all the right steps to ensure that they have the right support and resources during the admissions process. So thank you for coming. So let's go ahead and do some introductions. So let's talk about who we have here with us today. So I'll start. I am your host. My name is Kate Crockett. I am actually the Senior Director of Student Success here at A-List Education. I've actually been working with students for just under 5 years. I help with everything around test prep plans, academic resources, recommendations around academic tutoring, anything that your student might feel that they need support around while they're navigating through high school into their continuous education. So as for speakers, we have Scott Suzel from A-List Education. So he is my co-host here tonight, and he is a college admissions advisor, instructor, and a curriculum developer with us. He has over 15 years of experience, a super impressive resume in helping students specialize in prep around ACT and SAT, and all sorts of graduate admissions tests as well. As for our guest speaker, we have Kate Menier. So she's actually the Director of College Admissions here at A-List Education. She has another impressive resume, over 10 years of experience in college advising, but really helping with students all over the US, internationally. She's helped students get into very impressive schools like Cornell, NYU. You guys can see the list there. We have Johns Hopkins, plenty more. I could go on, but I do have an ask of you all in attendance here tonight. So as I mentioned, we want to make sure that we make the most of your time here. So the best way that we could do that is encouraging you guys to use our chat feature, which is going to be on the right-hand side of this platform here. We will have Kate actually managing most of the chat questions in there. So this is your time. Pick her brain, use her as a resource. Great opportunity to ask your subject matter experts everything you need to know that's specific to your family goals. So I encourage you guys to use our chat over there. And without further ado, I'm going to go ahead and hand the stage over to Kate and Scott. They'll provide you with tons of resources, and we look forward to getting to know you guys a little bit more here tonight.
Thank you, Kate. So we wanted to just start off by putting a poll up, just because there are it's just one of the functions that the room has, and we want to make sure that everyone's able to participate in that. They're also interesting, so you can kind of put it in there and see kind of the other people who are showing up for an event like this. But yeah, so the first one is just asking whether you yourself or your child is a freshman, sophomore, junior, or senior. We're just trying to get a handle on sort of where you are in the process of admissions. And here the answers are coming through already. So I see a lot of sophomores, juniors, even some freshmen. I almost didn't put freshmen in there, but people are getting a really early start. That's really awesome. So I'm glad I did. Yeah, I mean, I would expect to see lots of people sort of in the middle of their high school matriculation, and that's what we have. But also some seniors who are still just like getting ready to send out applications right around the corner. And so it's exciting to have all of you guys in here. I want to, before we really get started in earnest, I want to reiterate and just kind of echo what Kate said about really congratulating you guys for being here. It's been a crazy and difficult year for many, if not most of us. And, that includes students, especially. It's the psychological impact of not being in class and being with friends and all that kind of thing. We really are sensitive to that, and we understand that it's been difficult. And yet here we all are kind of marching forward and trying to get ourselves into a position where we can improve or reach our academic goals. And so everyone here should be applauded for being able to tough their way through all of this and come out on the other side. One of the things that's been really complicated about all of this is how fast everything changes when something like this occurs. When you have global pandemic and all of a sudden people aren't in schools, and there are issues with even, like, for example, testing and being able to get into a room with other students to test. And it really throws a wrench into the way things have typically been done. And then all of a sudden, everyone is sent scrambling, trying to catch up with the right information. And it's hard to come by because you'll hear different messages from different places. And to be fair, like, different schools handled the pandemic differently as well. So we're going to talk about all of those things and sort of just talk about sort of where we are, a snapshot of where we are right now, and where it looks like we're going moving forward when it comes to admissions in a pandemic era where more testing is not de-emphasized, but not as required as it used to be. And so that's really the focus of today. So the agenda, first, we're going to talk about when you should apply as test optional. Test optional didn't used to be a thing, and now it very much is. And so we're going to talk about that. We're going to look into a case study into the Harvard admissions. We're also going to do a little talk about, like, what it means to have good extracurriculars and what you can do to build those extracurriculars as a sophomore and junior and senior even. And we're also going to talk about the college essay. So obviously, as testing becomes less required, the other elements of an admissions packet can become more important, especially if you choose to apply test optional. And so everything else becomes more emphasized. It's not like there's just a missing piece that doesn't get filled in by something else. And so there's still very rigorous guidelines and an order to the way that they process applications and end up choosing people for seats. First thing, put in the water. So the first things first, if you didn't reach your goals on the SAT or the ACT, that's okay. It's these tests. I mean, prior to the pandemic, there was already, and we're sensitive to this, like there were already a lot of talk about the value of standardized tests. It's not like this is brand new. The pandemic sort of kicked that into overdrive and forced some schools' hands in terms of, like, the way that they were going to handle testing. So ongoing conversation. For sure, there is value in the process of preparing for standardized tests across the board. There's no question. Now, as to whether the scores are accurate reflections of a person's ability and all those other issues, those are absolutely debatable. But the bottom line is that for most students, like, high stakes testing is going to be a part of your lives for a while, not just now, but going forward into school and into grad school even. And at the very least, sort of having an understanding about how high stakes testing works and how you should study is very valuable for that reason alone. If you didn't reach your goals on the SAT, ACT, that's completely okay. Like, you are not the only one in that boat. A test score like the ACT score or SAT doesn't define you as a person at all. It doesn't define your child. It doesn't mean that they can't do it or they can't do a rigorous academic curriculum. It doesn't mean any of that. It's just a test, and they have specific quirks, the SAT and the ACT both. Um, the big thing about being in that situation, if you are set a goal for yourself for the ACT SAT and you didn't hit it, well, there are still things that you can do to improve the way that your application looks when you send it out. Again, first thing, just make sure you stay calm. It's okay. Like, only work on the things that, I know it's cliche, but like, you can only control certain things. And you want to focus on those. If your test score is behind you, then focus on the other stuff and don't worry about it. But look at what you're good at. Like, look at what your very best characteristics are, and try to highlight those as much as you can in any application. I mean, that's the basic gist of it. You can do that by exhausting all other resources you have. So, go do interviews, practice your interviews, nail all of your AP classes that you still have to take. Like, just crush them and get the highest GPA you possibly can. That looks great on an application. Don't get senioritis, get wonderful grades, as coming from a person who definitely did get senioritis, but do everything you can to sort of maximize your GPA in your senior year. And your extracurriculars and stuff are still available. We'll talk about that, but that kind of stuff can all take you over the top and get you into the school you want. So we'll talk more about all of this. The important takeaway here is that, an SAT or ACT score, there's value in efforting the very highest score you can possibly get, trying to reach your maximum potential. If you don't hit your goals, it's not the end of the world. You can still get into your goal school, and this is the way to do it. First things first, a look into the admissions process. Now, this is pretty interesting because actually until recently, we really didn't have a good peek at the admissions process for a lot of schools. The way that admissions departments would handle the application admission process was largely done behind the curtain, in the cover of night. And so you never really know what they were doing in order to get people in. But there was a landmark, and you can read about it if you're interested, a landmark trial in 2018 where a group of students actually sued Harvard. And because of that trial, Harvard was actually forced to for the first time, bring their admissions process out into the sunlight. And so we got a lot of peeks into how it happens. Now, I'm not going to suggest that the way that Harvard does it is the way that everyone else does it. That's not necessarily the case, but it did give us some insights into the way that committees work and how that sort of process works as they just have this like absolute truckload of applications come in, and they're trying to sift through all of them and divvy them up and figure out how to place value on certain pieces of paper and not on others. So it's pretty interesting. The first step is recruitment, and that's the one you can see at the top. There's just a bunch of students, and like they're looking actively for students that they want at their school, and that's the recruitment process. And the next step is for Harvard anyway, is the interview, where they finally talk to a student and get some insight into who that person really is. Interviews can occur at different places. They aren't as important or even possible at all schools. So I don't want you to think that like the interview process always happens at step 2. Again, this is sort of specific to Harvard. The third step is the first read through the application. Once we get past that, then stuff actually gets broken out into the subcommittees. Subcommittees are smaller groups who are able to kind of really parse through all the different pieces of an application and decide who they like and who they maybe don't want, or even like who they really want to fight for if it may be an unpopular pick or there's something they really like about a certain student or student applicant. So at that point, if someone makes it past subcommittee, it goes to the full committee, and that's all the subcommittees combined. They all group together. And at that point, they are able to come together and make a decision on who they actually want for the seats at a certain school. And then step 6, of course, for the lucky students who get in, is acceptance. And so that's how it works. It's nice to get that insight into how it works. What that actually means for you as an applicant is that there are certain things you definitely want to do and things you don't want to do when it comes to making an impression on these people at the committee level, because that's a really, really important step here. And it's not all about the hard metrics of your GPA and your testing scores anymore. So when they're looking at a particular applicant, they will break the applicant's performance, I guess you could say, up to that point into some different categories. And this is here they are. Essentially, this is what they're evaluating you on. One, academic, obviously, that should be pretty important when people are considering your application to a school of higher learning. So that's definitely on there. Extracurriculars for sure. Athletics for sure as well. Like, if you're a top level athlete, we all know top level athletes often get scholarships to go to schools because they bring a lot of attention to a school and for other reasons. So the fourth bullet here is recommendations. That's essentially the support that you have of your own school, because that's where the recommendations are coming from, your high school, that is. And then there's personal things like your essays, your interviews, your activities, and all that kind of stuff. And then the very last bullet is sort of an overall impression of these other bullet points brought together. And honestly, that last one is the most important. So even though there is a definite scoring process, and we'll talk about this in a couple slides, but even though they do sort of have a calculation for this, in the end, it ends up being about who they like. And who they like is a holistic view of all these other bullets. And so the scores matter, but the scores only matter because they inform the person in the admissions department about the student. It's not because they just do a calculation and one person gets, a 1.8 and someone else gets a 1.9. So just be aware that this isn't like a strict, it's not a strict algorithm or anything for getting in. That's not how it works. All right. So how important is each particular piece of your app? Well, according to NACAC, which is a really kind of not a great sounding acronym. There are acronyms I enjoy more than NACAC, but it is what it is. NACAC is the National Association for College Admissions Counseling, and they do surveys every year up until 2020. They did surveys and released the results, and so they would, advisors often pulled their recommendations and their strategies around getting students in from these NACAC surveys. I'm going to try to not say that acronym again the rest of the day. So in 2020, they didn't release one. And in 2021, we also don't have one. So there are obvious reasons for that. But the last one we do have is still probably a pretty good snapshot of the relative importance of all the pieces of an app. You can see that grades have the highest considerable importance bar. And that was true even before the pandemic. Now, once you get up into so I teach the LSAT and the GMAT as well for graduate level studies. At that level, those tests are as important as your GPA, as your undergraduate GPA for sure. But for undergraduate, that's not the case. It's really your academic performance in your high school is really the most important element of your application, and it will continue to be. So that's kind of the highest bar on considerable importance. And then as we go across from left to right, college prep classes, so AP classes or anything that counts for college credit, also hugely important. And those have actually gained in importance over the last 20 years. It didn't used to be it didn't used to be number two, the penultimate important thing, years and years ago, but it is now. The strength of your curriculum. And so they do look at at the school that you come from. That is an element. They're not just looking at GPAs across the board as though you can they're making apples to apples comparisons. That's not the case. So they do look at the strength of your curriculum and also how academically rigorous the school that you came from is. And then number 4 is admissions test scores. So, we talked about how things are changing a lot, and a lot of students simply weren't able to even get into a testing room and decided not to test. And then once the institutions themselves started making it public that the tests that they were going test optional, at least for 1 year, then a lot of students sort of hopped on that bandwagon and were like, yeah, that's fine. I don't need to take a test. And there's some pretty startling statistics around that. Even in the 2019-2020 school year, 76% of applicants who sent in an application, obviously it's redundant, but 76% of applicants actually included a test score in their application. And then by the 2019-2020 year, or I'm sorry, 2020-21, it dropped to less than 50%. And that's a startling statistic, really, to think about. And there's a lot of reasons for that. I mean, obviously, the schools, institutions changing their rules makes a big difference. And I think a lot of students took that as an opportunity where they could start to apply to schools that may have been reaches before. They're like, well, might as well give it a shot now that we're test optional. Like, I didn't think I could test into Stanford or something like that, but maybe I can get in on the basis of my character and write essays and all that. And to some extent that's true, but we also have found that the top level schools, the most competitive schools, they are still strongly considering the test scores. And so you've just got to be aware that if you don't have a test score in your application, you still have room to make up for that in your in the rest of your app. But you've got to do it. It's not the case that it's just gone. They still sort of a test score is still a great way for high achieving students to make a mark on an admissions council. There's no question about that. It's just because it's not required doesn't mean it's test blind, even though there are certain schools that went test blind and just eliminated testing as any sort of metric for admissions. There are a few, but most actually just went optional. And most said, at least at the time, that they were actually planning on going back to the traditional structure, after we got post-pandemic, really. After admissions test scores, you got the essay or the writing sample, and as Kate Manier will tell you, writing an essay is a crazy exercise because there are so many pitfalls that you want to avoid, and she's going to talk a lot about that at the end of the session. But it is a weird exercise in trying to tell someone how awesome you are without actually ever saying the words "I'm really awesome." And so it's bizarre. It's very, very difficult to do. And there's a lot of really good pointers that she's going to give you guys at the end. But writing an essay has increased importance, especially if a test score is missing. Recommendation letters speak for themselves. You thing to avoid with recommendation letters, you want to avoid anyone sending in like a form letter. That's very obviously a form letter. You want to try to get letters of recommendation that are more personal than that. Demonstrated interests, or extracurriculars, and are the last two. So let's kind of fill out the things that are considered as you're applying. Okay, so we talked a little bit about how let me go back to the slide actually just a second. Go back to the slide here. So on all of these points, when a admissions council is taking a look at someone's app, they're going to basically rank you in each of these categories. And they'll give you a ranking between 1 and 6. 1 being the highest and 6 being the lowest. Now, let's talk a little bit about the rubric for what those numbers mean. If you get a 1, that means you are a superstar in any of those categories, a potential major academic contributor with summa potential, near perfect scores and grades. If you were in math competitions and or anything like that, that also helps. But it's someone who is essentially an absolute star. And that doesn't necessarily have to be academics. It can be other things as well. It can be any of those bullets that we looked at before. A 2, for example, is someone who is in like the mid 700s or higher in the SAT, or 33 on the ACT. So then a 2 is a 2 is exceptional as well. Like a 2 puts you in the 98th percentile for those tests. Like that's an exceptional score. But I just want to kind of let you know how high a 1 is. if number 2 is a 90th percentile score on the SAT or the ACT, a 1 is truly, truly exceptional and kind of really stands out. Number 3 is a mid 600s, low 700 score on the SAT. So you can think about this as like a 90th percentile situation. So you're kind of a 90th percentile in either in the traditional standardized tests or in those other areas. 1s and 2s and 3s though, for most schools are going to be an advantage for you in the application process. ones or twos or threes. Fours, fives, and sixes are not. And so they'll take all these numbers and they'll sort of, again, average them out. They may weight them differently. They may weight the buckets differently depending on the school. And we just, we're aware of that. But in the end, they will come up with a number, and they use those numbers to help them evaluate everyone against each student, I guess, against everyone else. Now, again, I'm going to bring this up again because it's important. They do not make direct number comparisons. They use it as an aid to help compare students, but they're still taking a holistic approach and trying to just really pick the students they feel are going to, first of all, make the best impression on the student body that's there, leave the biggest mark after they leave. Like that's really the goal. Okay, so the personal score. The personal score is actually pretty easy to define because essentially you can just think of it this way. Your personal score is what kind of roommate would the student be? And they really do think about it like that. Like, would I want to actually live in a room with this person and go to school with them? And the personal score is drawn from lots of different places. It's your extracurriculars. It's your tone, your author's voice that comes across in your essay. All of that stuff is sort of drawn into this metric, which is your personal score. Like, what kind of roommate would this student be? And that's a great way to think about it. It's also a great way to think about it while you're writing your essay, because I've read a ton of essays, and tone, like an author's tone, your writer's voice, is so incredibly important in the essays. And you want to make sure you come across as your authentic self. And so if you always have in the back of your mind, like, all right, I just moved in with this person, like you're writing to the person you're moved in with, they're your new roommate. Like, I want them to like me. So what should I write? That's a really good way to sort of think about how to approach your essay, because it's the thing that ends up being important with the admissions council themselves. All right, so extracurricular roundtable. I want to try to get a little bit of group participation in here. We'll see what we come up with. In the chat, share an activity or an experience that has impressed you. So someone tells you about something that they did. And so tell me about something that impressed you and why you think it did that. I'll give you guys a second. I had a friend once who told me he ate 2 Chipotle burritos on a single day. And I said, that's amazing. I was pretty impressed. I don't know if that's going to get him into Harvard. Yeah, those are really cool. Travel, Lionel says travel or public service contributions. Absolutely correct. I mean, that is always impressive when you see someone giving of themselves and spending their time to try to make a difference. And so that is always something that's impressive. Lauren says, raise funds to rebuild a dog park in 1 month. That's really interesting, because we're going to talk about that in a second. It's specifically because it wasn't just raise funds to rebuild a dog park. It was there was a certain timetable, and they did it in a single month. Bowman, the workshop is recorded, so yeah, you'll be able to watch it later. Clayton says, publish a short story. That's really great. That's a great one because it shows that the person has some creativity, and not just that, but the drive to actually finish something and get it published. Surfing is dope, first of all. So that'd be by the way, you're free to talk about these kinds of things. Like, if you love surfing and you're passionate about it, you should definitely talk about it for sure. There isn't any right answer here, is really the point. But there is a way for you to frame things that comes across as impressive. And it's really similar to what you would do if you are, as an adult, if you are creating a resume, which is like one of my least favorite things to do. But if you are creating a resume, you don't want to necessarily just put, like, I worked in marketing, like, achieved sales, or anything like that, right? You need to be more specific. And that's sort of also what they're looking for here. It's very, very similar to the approach you want to take with a really solid resume. And let's take a look at what are some things that you want to consider while you are thinking about extracurriculars, and also the kinds of stuff that you might end up putting into something like an essay. Initiative, growth, and concrete outcomes are what's really, really important. So it's not enough to take sort of a sort of high level approach to something or describing something that you've experienced. And it's such a waste of an amazing experience that you had if you don't mention the growth and concrete outcomes piece of it. And that's the mistake that a lot of students make. And I'll give you an example of this. Here's an example on the left, an example on the right. They're both the same activity. They're both the same thing, but on the left is the wrong way to do it. On the right is the right way. That's not why I put it on the right, but it just occurred to me that I did. So it works out. On the left, raise money for the Red Cross. That's awesome. That's a great thing to get involved in by any metric. Like, most people would be like, that's really cool. That's awesome. However, if you said, I raised $17,000 for the Red Cross by planning, coordinating, and executing 4 fundraisers and managing a group of 10 students in order to achieve it. And even like before, when we actually talked about achieving something over a certain period of time, that fits in the same category. I did this in 2 months, or whatever it was the case, or I hit a deadline, right? So these are the kinds of things that make a huge, huge difference. And it's often the case that, you're not able to say these things. It's just that people don't. And so just be mindful of that. The way that it's stated on the right comes across as mature and impressive to an admissions council. So this is courtesy of the wonderful Kate Manier. I am going to start doing this whenever I'm working with my own students, but I love this as an exercise. It also helps keep your admissions packet focused on what's important and gives it sort of a cohesive feel. So creating your Big 10. What are 10 things about you that you would want admissions officers to know? If you think about this beforehand, before you even pulling stuff together and create a list, it's extremely helpful, because it's nice when you're putting together an admissions packet. It's nice to have a North Star. It's nice to be working towards something, message that you're trying to get across, as opposed to just like pulling disparate things together and putting it into an admissions packet. So what are 10 things that you would want admissions officers to know? Some examples: I'm really passionate about music, or surfing, as we saw in the chat earlier. Great examples. I love to create playlists for friends based on their personalities, what they like. I spend hours every day listening and thinking about music. So someone who would say something like this, music is incredibly important to that person. You wouldn't necessarily want to leave those things out of an admissions packet because you don't think they apply. If you're really passionate about something, work it in some way, through the essay or through something else. Another thing, my family owns a restaurant. I spend a lot of time outside of school working there, helping them with the business. That's wonderful. Like, your family owns a business and you're taking an active part in the success of that business. Absolutely. That's a huge thing. And you want to include that. It's obviously, something that takes up a lot of your energy and your mental space. And so you'd want to include that. When you're doing this exercise, you don't want to just pick 10 things. You want to just, think about as many possible things as you can and create a list, and then rank them. Like, think about which ones are the most important, or not even the most important to you, but which ones are the most important that for you to have someone else see. You know what I mean? Like, you want someone else to have an understanding of who you are. And that's the lens through which you should view this list. You're looking to create a list that will put you in the very best light and make someone want to be your roommate, right? That is amazing. That's an amazing story. The chat's really, really cool. Yeah. All right. I'm going to now pass the presentation over to Kate Manier, who's going to talk to you a little bit about the essay process. Kate, hello. As I mentioned briefly before, the essays are a huge pain for a lot of students who don't even know how to get started. So can you help us out a little bit?
Of course. Thank you, Scott. And wow, Hui, I just want to say, that is the coolest thing I've ever heard. Developing video games. I mean, what a perfect example of exactly what we're talking about, which is taking an activity that not every student or not everybody thinks is a formal activity, but actually is super interesting and can help students really stand out. And the essay kind of folds into that, right? So when you have a really interesting activity that you're super passionate about, you also have a lot of great things to write about when it comes to your essays, right? So let's talk about the college essays in general. And obviously the Big Ten is something that definitely you can bring into your college essays, but more likely that list that you're creating when you're starting your Big Ten is actually a better resource. And I'll tell you why in a little bit. So first of all, what is the college essay? I'm so glad that we have a real mix of students here because I'm sure seniors, you know what the college essay is by now and probably are pretty tired of it at this point, I would guess. But for some of our younger folks, the college essay is the one essay that you send to colleges when you are applying that tells your own personal story. It is 650 words. So it's a little bit of a tall order to tell your entire life story in 650 words. That's what colleges are asking you to do. Fairly simple, fairly easy. We can do that, right? So the college essay in general is really difficult because of that limitation. 650 words feels like a lot when you have a school assignment, right? Give me 650 words on this book report. But when it comes to talking about yourself, it's really, really hard to sum up exactly who you are into 650 words. So that's why when we have a question, when should you start? It should be as early as possible, which is why I said that seniors, you're probably pretty tired of these essays by now, even though it's September, which might feel late to some of you younger kids. Also, listen, if you're a senior and you haven't started your essay, there are many opportunities to keep going. Early schools are not due until November 1st, but I would definitely get started now. And hopefully with the resources that we give you guys today, you'll get started on foot. So why is the college essay important? All of you might be able to guess at this point that the college essay is one of the most important personal factors that can go into an application. So I like to break applications down into two categories. It can have hard factors and soft factors. So hard factor is data, right? Numbers, facts about you, things that are completely quantitative, that just are kind of you by the numbers, right? And then there's the soft factors, which are more qualitative, or what are you like as a person? What do you sound like when you talk? What is it like to talk with you? What are your values, goals? What do you want to study? All of those things are just as important as the hard factors. And the essay certainly is one of the most important soft factors because outside of interviews, which every school has different policies on, the essay is really your only chance to essentially be in the room with an admissions officer when they're reading your application. An essay, when it's successful, should feel like you are talking directly to the admissions officer in a conversation in the room with them. It shouldn't read like it's academic. It shouldn't read like you're proving a point. It should be in conversation, you telling a story. So in general, the college essay, the goal of it is to humanize you when these admissions officers only have so much time to review your application and see you as a bunch of numbers. The essay will allow you to actually become a human being in their eyes, which is obviously quite important when you're being viewed against a bunch of other students. So I always say that the most important part of the college essay is the topic. Now, there are prompts to the college essay that a lot of you seniors have probably seen. There are 7, and I've actually chosen to omit those prompts because I don't like students to work from the prompts. I think that that can limit you, and I think that there are so many wonderful different topic ideas that can actually fit any prompt. The 7th essay prompt for the Common App is a topic of your choice. So that's where we start, right? Because we want the students to start from a place of what's great about them and then go to the essay prompt and not the other way around. So the topic is incredibly important because it's really just the frame or the lens that you use to show something important about you. The topic can be something really big about you, like a really big life story, but more often it's a lot more successful when it's a small and focused story about you that often you might not even think much about. You might have a personal quirk that your friends and family make fun of you about, and that can be your college essay. And often that says a lot more about a student than them going through a really big story, right? What's most important when you're finding a topic is that the essay and the topic should be thoughtful. It should tell a story that offers an insight into you as a person. Whether you want to use something really small or something really big to say that insightful thing, that's up to you, right? In general, though, because we have 650 words, it's honestly a great strategy to pick something small and then draw a bigger insight from it. Because, like I said, 650 words feels like a lot, but it's really not when you're writing your college essay. So, like I said, some of the best essays focus on really ordinary topics. I'm going to rattle off a couple now of students that I've worked with. There have been very many. So one student wrote about painting nails. One student wrote about friends that he made working in a nursing home. One student wrote about playing the guitar specifically, but he's terrible at playing the guitar. So what are some running themes here? Is there anything academic about the things that I just listed? Not really, right? Probably because think about the essay's place in your application. Admissions officers will see all these academic things about you. They'll know what you want to study. They will know what your grades are, and they'll know what activities you've done. So the essay is just this wonderful opportunity to give a different dimension of you as a person. So when you're coming up with the topic, that's what I want you to focus on. What is something about me that is really different or sets me apart from other students, and mostly people, not other students, but other people. It's really important that readers get a sense of who you are as a person. So one other tool that I like to use when I'm helping students come up with essay topics is coming up with a topic statement. And this helps not only with developing a topic, but it also helps you with writing your essay, because once you're writing your essay, you want to put a lot of things in, but once you know that you're writing towards this one topic statement, then you're going to have a more successful and cohesive essay. So basically, the topic statement's simple. I'm using the story of blank to show that I am blank. Sometimes you tweak it, right? I'm using a description of blank to show that I'm blank, but that's it. It's fairly simple. So one example that I'm going to bring in is I had a student who we were working to figure out her essay topic for a really long time. Very sweet girl and really, really strong student, but just didn't really know, felt not very confident in writing an essay in general. Finally, in the second hour, she said that she had really small hands when she was younger, and she wanted to play piano. That was the thing she wanted to do the most in the world. Her piano teacher said, "You can't play piano. Your hands are way too small. You're not going to be able to reach the keys. So sorry, but I think you should find another instrument." She goes on to tell me that basically through this experience, she decided instead of giving up to actually use her small hands to her advantage in playing the piano. So while she couldn't reach wide key, like a wide key range, she could be really nimble in her finger work. And she actually was able to extend that story into a statement about her as a person, of being able to turn advantages into disadvantages into advantages, not advantages into disadvantages, as a student and a person. So something isn't going her way, but she's going to be able to actually flip it on its head and make it work for her. So finally, we just have a quote from Jennifer Gales, who's an admissions officer at Sarah Lawrence College. What she says is, "It's not about the topic, but why it's important to you and how you can showcase who you are as a student and an individual through that topic." Keep in mind, it says both student and individual. And again, I'm going to emphasize individual. Are there any questions? Oh, nice, Ford Escort. That's adverse. That's adverse. All right. Once you've gone into selecting your topic, you obviously still have the work of writing the actual essay. So let's go through some do's and don'ts of writing a great college essay. When you go through these things, you will notice that a lot of these do's and don'ts are kind of paired and work together. So for instance, I'm going to highlight one pairing, which is a do is write in your own voice and be yourself. This is incredibly important and is very, very counter to what every single student in the world has learned in high school, right? Your job is, when you write an essay, you want to polish your vocabulary, you want to demonstrate knowing great vocabulary words. And that's sort of true here, but also it's really important that your North Star when you're writing is that this sounds like you talking. Because again, this is you as a person being in the room with the admissions officer. So you want to write how you talk. On the opposite side of the column is don't. And the don't that I find as a pairing is rely on the thesaurus. So the example that I like to use is, if you don't say the word indubitably in your everyday life, then I probably wouldn't write it in your college essay. But if you do, then you should, because I think that gives an impression of who you are, right? So definitely that's a really key thing. Write this essay in your own voice, write how you talk. I mean, you should write in proper grammar. That is a caveat, but you should write in the way that you talk, but in the Grammarly expression of it. So another big do is to write about something not found elsewhere on your application. And I want to focus on this because I think it's really important that students understand that when you're writing about an activity, that doesn't necessarily mean that you're writing about something that's found elsewhere in your application. Surfing can be on your resume, and you can still write your essay about surfing, because your essay about surfing is going to have a different angle on you through surfing, right? As long as your essay that's about an activity or about something academic still gives a different angle to you as a person, then it's doing its job. But the pairing of writing about something not found elsewhere on your application is, don't just repeat your resume, right? So you don't want to just outline one achievement in one activity that you did and go into the logistics of it. It should have a story, it should have a before, during, and it should have an after that shows how you've grown. Another important do is to use lots of details, or in other words, show, don't tell. If someone has a favorite show and they really love the acting in it, I don't know if there are any theater folks. A-List has a ton of actors, so I feel like now I have to know the lingo. But if you really like an acting performance, say an actor is sad, do they simply say, "I'm sad"? Or do they start crying? Do they throw themselves on the floor and weep? Which performance do you believe more? The same goes for the college essay. So you should definitely not just say, "I was really sad that day." You should try to think of some details that demonstrate through either what you've done or what was going on in your head and your thoughts, how you felt. And that always can make your essay more powerful. So there are a couple of more don'ts here. In general, I think don'ts are kind of not a great place to start when you're writing an essay, but when you're starting to polish things up and get towards the end, that's when you can approach your essays as sort of an editor, as an admissions officer, put on your admissions officer hat and think, okay, am I doing any of these things? Am I bragging or making excuses here? Am I overusing cliches or idioms? And if I am, are they purposeful? Do I want to be using them? And do I think there's a good reason for them? Because if you think there is, then I think that's fine. It should just come from you, right? So just closing up, a final thing when you are finishing up your essay and you've gotten to the end of the process, which sometimes can be long and difficult, and everybody gets writer's block sometimes. My hope is always that in the writing process, it's a little bit more fun because you're writing about yourself and you get to learn things about yourself and kind of tell a story about yourself that's really interesting and has a full narrative, right? And I often think about it almost like writing movies. Like writing, if your life was a movie, what would be an interesting movie that you wrote about yourself? But anyway, once you get towards the end of writing your essay, these are 4 things that you should look for. These are the 4 components of a standout essay. And this is something that I definitely wanted to touch on. Values. Values is a weird term if you're a high schooler, and also I don't expect every single high schooler to know their exact values, but you can start to touch on them in your essay, right? A goal of an admissions officer is to know what's important to the student. What does the student care about most? And a successful college essay will impart that message. The big one is vulnerability. And Scott had referenced before about this weird thing about the college essay, how you have to kind of brag about yourself, but not brag about yourself. And I did say the essay is the ultimate humble brag. That's mostly true, although I think the most successful essays also have that vulnerability to it. So if you can think of a story about your life in which you started off really not great, this could be personally, academically, extracurricularly, and then you actually overcame it and can observe the ways that you overcame it, that's a much more powerful story than something like, I started taking math and I loved math and I was good at math. And then I kept taking math and I was continuing to be good at math the whole time. And then I finished and I was good at it. So obviously a story that's flat all the way isn't as interesting as something where you actually get vulnerable with admissions officers and say, here's something that I'm nervous about. Here's something that I'm not as great at. And kind of put that into your essay. I think that's a really important component. Then we have insight. Can you draw larger conclusions from smaller things, like in this hands essay? Can you make connections between 2 different things that seem like they're on the opposite sides of the spectrum of something, but you're able to make that connection? Those are all great ways to display insight. And then we have craft. So is the essay organized really well? Are the words precise? Not necessarily great vocabulary, but are the words really powerful words? Are they words that give off a great picture? Is the writing vivid? And that's what craft means in the college essay. So I think I've handed this off to Kate right now. So thank you guys so much. I'm going to go ahead and look into some of these questions and we'll pick some up at the end. But that's all I had. And thank you guys.
Thank you guys. So after hearing everything that Scott and Kate had to say, I'm sure you guys see the value in having proper guidance, support, and resources all throughout the college advising process. So I know we threw a lot of information out there. So I'm sure you're probably thinking, what's next? What do we do with all this information? I would say a good place to start would be to book a complimentary consultation call with one of us here. So this way you get the chance to talk to some subject matter experts. We can also go through and figure out your exact roadmap for what your students are looking for. So gives us a chance to personalize everything from college advising, testing recommendations, academic recommendations, extracurriculars, the full scope. So we will hope that we can continue to be that resource for you. I know that here on the forum, you'll see we also are willing to share with you guys a little bit about our college advising experience here at A-List. So when paired with our expert advisors, we are able to actually walk you through this deep dive in discovering your story. So I know we talked about finding your humble brag with some vulnerability, of course. And sometimes it can be hard to get started with telling your story. So we want to help you with that first step, kind of like pave that way for you so that everyone can feel more confident and comfortable throughout the college admissions process. Best way to do that is to get in touch with us. So we'll share a booking link. Please go ahead and book that with us. Again, it's a complimentary session and definitely worth it to have the experts here help you from a personalized standpoint. So also, I want to go ahead and leave the floor open to answer some questions. So I know we flagged a few, Kate. So you might have one or two, or Scott, that you want to answer in the group. I'll also include a link over here. You guys can go ahead and book a call with us. So let's leave the floor open for some questions. Scott or Kate, do you guys have one that jumped out at you?
By someone, and the question was, is overcoming an injury a too cliched of a topic? Specifically a sports injury. This is a really classic example of an essay that a good amount of students have probably dealt with, or something that a lot of students have dealt with. And I think that if you were to pursue that topic, you just want to take the time to figure out your angle and what made your challenge a little bit different than just overcoming a general injury. I find in general, and I'm not a sports person, so this might be why, sorry, I find that sports are really lend themselves to cliches in general. I think it's really easy to rattle off a list of sports cliches. And that also means, like, what are some takeaways about sports that you generally have, right? I learned how to be a good team player. I learned how to persist, against my injury. And I think those are two things that a lot of students think of really quickly because it's fairly straightforward. So I would just say, if you are going to pick a story about an injury, I think that there are many different angles you can take. I had one student who wrote about overcoming an injury, and he used meditation to overcome it. So I think that there are ways to actually do a more straightforward topic, but just put your own spin on it.
All right, great. Thanks, Kate. Scott, did any questions jump out at you? Anything that you wanted to answer?
Yeah. So, I mean, the question about whether you should go to Harvard or MIT, I'll handle that one. You should go to both of them. You can't miss with a school like that. I mean, and honestly, this is true for everyone. Really, you want to pick a school. Don't just look at the rankings and pick that school that's the highest ranked on your list. That's really not the way to do it. Schools have different cultures, they have different environments, and that's incredibly important to your experience there. I would take all of those things into account and pick the school that's the best fit for you in the end. It's not all about rankings, but of course those things are taken into consideration, of course. But really, you want to feel comfortable at school.
All right, great, thanks. Kate, anything else that you flagged? I know you answered a lot in the chat. Is there anything else that was flagged that we didn't get to yet?
Yeah, I wanted to first piggyback on the MIT or Harvard question, because I think it's really important that we emphasize that those schools are, and Susan has a great question too, so we can talk about that in a second, but those schools have a high ranking, but I think it's really important to understand where those rankings come from. And those rankings come from not that many factors that actually have to do with how fantastic your education is. There are a lot of schools that are really well on a ranking list that have incredible educational programs, and you will leave with incredible opportunities. So I always like to suggest that students don't really look at those rankings because they have a lot of different factors that weigh in. I think one example is how well funded a school is, for instance. And yes, how well funded a school is can impact you, right? Definitely does. But I think there are also other things about retention, and sometimes it's an average test score, and some schools are smart businesses and they know that a higher average test score will get their ranking up, right? So they'll pick students who have high test scores, but maybe not other really interesting things about them, So those US rankings are always a little bit flawed, in my opinion. So another great question, and I don't know, Scott, you want to take this, is how to decide whether to include your test score or not. If you have any thoughts, I can also jump in.
Yeah, that's first of all, really good question. And that's a question that's more important now than it has been in the past, is whether you should include your test scores. Essentially, your test scores are either going to be something that positively influences your application or they won't. If you are at the median, it's not going to negatively affect you, and even a median score can positively affect you because it means that you check that box for students that are at that school. If your scores are significantly lower than the median at a school, that's not something you want to end up including in your app. Generally speaking, again, like you just think about it like it's like a teeter totter. If it's on one side, it's positively, it's positively balancing your application, and if it's on the other side, it's sort of negatively influencing it. And there are other parts of your application that have to overcome a low score. So that's the way to think about it, and it differs from school to school. You may send scores out to some schools and not send scores out to others, and that's something that a lot more applicants did last year than ever before. Kate, do you have anything to add?
Me or that?
Clacking away. Sorry.
Kate.
So yeah, I think you should take it case by case. I think a lot more students this year are submitting to some schools and not submitting to others. So yeah, I agree. Where you are in the top 75th percentile of test scores, you can report it. And where you're below, you can, or below, yeah, I think you can, it really depends. But I think if you're top 75th percentile of all scores of students in the student body, then that's a good general rule.
Yeah, for sure. And then it's like, and below the 25th is sort of, I would think twice about including a score. But really anything in the middle, it makes up the bulk of the student population, anything between the 25th and 75th percentile. And so, in those situations, it's probably not going to make a huge difference one way or another. It's the other elements are going to be much more important. But if you have a score at the 50th percentile, even I would generally advise.
And then another great question was from Ray, which is, how weird can my essays be? Which is a wonderful question. I was typing, and then I think everyone should just should hear this. But in general, I think weird is great. I think weird is always awesome because it's memorable. The one thing to remember when you're writing your essays is I'm not conflating this with weird, but I think the question is kind of how out there can I get? How me can I be? And there was a don't that was on our slide that said, don't pick something that's really controversial or politically sensitive. I don't always abide by that. I think if students are really passionate about something politically, then they can write about it. My caveat always is, if you're going to write about something that you're passionate about politically, it just shouldn't be, here is what I think about it, and I'm going to tell you exactly why it's true. It should be telling a story about how you changed in the journey of being passionate about this thing. So the topic can be a framework where it says something about you as a person, but it shouldn't be something that's like pushing a political point of view necessarily.
Yeah, and just to piggyback off that comment, Ray, if you're adding something that's that's real super quirky, be aware that that's going to have a different kind of impact on someone reading it. Like, someone may really not like it, and someone else may love it, and that's sort of what happens. Doing something like that, it makes you a bit of a wild card, which may not be a bad thing in all circumstances. But just be aware that that's kind of the case. If it's real quirky and real weird, you're going to get.
There used to be an essay prompt from UVA that was, "What is your quirk?" Which I think should be all essay prompts.
Yeah.
I like it. Well, thank you guys. So we're at our hour mark. I know we have a couple of outstanding questions, so I'll let you guys answer those there. Anything that was not answered, you guys can go ahead and book a free consultation call with us, and we're happy to answer any questions that you have that were specific to tonight, and anything around academics, college advising, and testing. So again, on behalf of Scott and I and our guest speaker, Kate, thank you for attending our webinar. We hope you guys took away some valuable information around the college admissions process. we will be doing these webinars as a series once a month. So we hope that we get the chance to be in front of you again next month on October 21st. At the same time, we will be hosting a webinar on the topic of academic support in the modern pandemic era. So to Scott's point, what he said in the beginning, lots of unknowns that we came off of last year, just making sure that everyone knows all of the resources that we can help provide moving forward into this new year. So please continue to use us as a trusted resource here at A-List Education. We hope to see you guys again soon. All right. Thank you so much.